Come on. Run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, run them jewels fast, Welcome to the Week 5 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis Podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Today we're going to be breaking down every single game that we just saw. The Monday night game just ended. We'll go over every single Sunday game as well as the Thursday game, the Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. Breaking it down from an advanced metrics and analytics standpoint to show you guys how teams won and how teams lost games. We're going to go into great level of detail, stuff that you wouldn't have seen if you just watched the game on TV, stuff you wouldn't have seen if you just read up on it on the internet. It's what we do every single week in this early edition of the podcast. Now, hopefully you guys are subscribing. If you're listening to this right now, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on YouTube, because we come back later in the week with a Thursday/Friday edition of the podcast, recorded on Thursday night, Friday morning again. Talk to Evan Silva out of Roto World, bring him on. We go through every single matchup for the games, all the key players that you need to be aware of, injury-related information, and figuring out what teams we think will overperform, underperform expectations from a betting perspective, as well as from a daily fantasy perspective. Tons of information there. So that's the weekend edition of the podcast, gets published on Friday. This edition of the podcast, the rear view mirror segment, going back over these games, as well as some news and notes, some big headlines that we're going to get into in just 1 second. Before I get into that, I want to mention that the football season is a quarter of the way over. We finished up weeks 1 through 4. Obviously, that's a very good thing. 1 month is in the books, but that means we only got 3 months left. So I encourage you guys, if you are betting on these games, if you're paying attention to sports betting at all, you're going to want to check out my website, SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I got a special offer for you. Just go ahead and enter the word SHARP as your coupon code, and that'll get you $100 off the rest of the season package. Now, I'm doing extremely well so far this season. The record is up on the website. Every single game that I release to clients is published right there as soon as the game kicks off, so you can track all the games that I'm giving out. But so far this season, 65% in NFL, including 75% on my specialty, which is my NFL totals. And in college totals, I'm at 71% for the year. So very strong start to the season. I usually get better later in the season, so I'm pretty pleased with this start right now. If you're interested, SharpFootballAnalysis.com, use the coupon code SHARP. One more thing about the NFL totals as it relates to daily fantasy. I told you guys at the onset of the season that I don't really pay attention to what most people in daily fantasy pay attention to when they talk about the quote-unquote Vegas totals, and based upon what the quote-unquote Vegas total is, I'm going to start these players or I'm going to bench these players. Me personally, as you guys know, I come up with my own numbers for the games. We look at my numbers compared to what is set by the odds makers to find market inefficiencies. We bet on the games where there's value indicated by my model. It's won for years. It's 60% lifetime. It's hitting 75% so far this season. So those are some of the things where, for instance, the Redskins-Eagles game, I was looking at that game to go under. I was recommending you steer clear of certain players in that game. The Kansas City-Cincinnati game was a game I recommended clients that was going to go over the total. Obviously it did. Evan Silva and I got on this podcast on Friday. We were talking about the fact that Andy Dalton is going to be able to hit some big passes. That's going to really open up some things for that run game that hasn't been opened up for the last couple of weeks. So look out for Hill and some of the other running backs for the Bengals to have a big day. So the bottom line is, whether you're looking at this from a daily fantasy perspective or from a sports betting perspective, the totals that I'm releasing to clients, and some of which I'm going to be touching on in the podcast, are going to be of a lot of value to you. So pay attention to the podcast, be a subscriber to the podcast, and if you're interested, definitely sign up for the packages over at SharpFootballAnalysis.com to get additional write-ups and logic and tons of reasoning on why I like certain games, because most of these games are going to come out with a pretty detailed write-up accompanying it. Story number 1, the problem with the Dallas Cowboys. The problem with the Dallas Cowboys is not being talked about, and that's why we're doing the research over here at Sharp Football Analysis to bring you guys cutting information so that other people will start talking about it after we've already discussed it. The problem with the Cowboys is their second half running game. The problem with their second half running game is that it does not exist. It disappears. It's there at the first half, but it's not there at the second half. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's Brandon Weeden back there because he's playing the entire game. So I know that he's there and Tony Romo is not, but the Cowboys running game disappears in the second half, so let's look at the numbers. I'll flash this slide up here. Once again, if you are watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see the graph right here and the chart. If you are not watching it on YouTube, that's fine. I'll go through the numbers now. You can always click in iTunes at the description of this particular episode of the podcast and touch on the hyperlink. That hyperlink will send you back to the page where you'll be able to see these graphics. But in the first half runs in 2014, when they did have DeMarco Murray, they were averaging 4.8 yards per carry. In the second half, they were averaging 4.5 yards per carry. The reason why it's so important to be able to run the ball in the second half is that when you have a lead, you need to be able to milk that clock and run the game out. Additionally, you may need to build on that lead slightly, and the best way to do that is to have the clock continuing to run, get good gains on first and second down so you set yourself up in third and manageable, and you're running the ball and the clock is continuing to tick, 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 tick. And that's how Dallas was winning a lot of its games. It was keeping its defense healthy. It was keeping its offense out on the field. This is exactly what I talked about this past summer when they traded away DeMarco Murray. Then they lost their starting cornerback due to injury in training camp. I said, could this be a big deal? Well, it all hinges on whether or not they can successfully run the football. Well, in 2015 so far this year, they've successfully ran the football in the first half, 5.4 yards per carry. That's a great number. A lot of big runs by Joseph Randle, a lot of impressive things that the Dallas Cowboys are doing early in games. However, in the second half, 5.4 loses 3 yards per carry and drops down to 2.4 yards per carry in the second half so far this season. Not good at all, and it gets even worse. The last 2 weeks, Dallas has had the lead at halftime over the Atlanta Falcons in Dallas and over the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans. Both dome games, they're obviously comfortable running on those surfaces. 6.9 yards per carry in the first half, only 1.2 yards per carry in the second half the last 2 weeks combined. That's miserable. That's pitiful. And that's why, in large part, they're losing those games late. As they take a lead, they led in both those games at halftime. They could not finish that game out in the second half. Joseph Randle, he's their bell cow back this year. He's supposed to be the guy carrying the load. He's going to have to carry even more load. Now another one of their running backs went down with injury. And trust me, you don't want Darren McFadden back there trying to carry the load for you. So Joseph Randle, you are the guy now. In the first half, 5.1 yards per carry and 4 touchdowns this year. In the second half, 5.1 drops to 1.9 yards per carry and no touchdowns. So that's what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys. That's their biggest problem, is they cannot run the football in the second half. Story number 2, the problem with the Philadelphia Eagles. We might as well stick with another team in the NFC East who was supposed to compete this year, was supposed to do a lot of good things this year, but is obviously struggling right now. Not so much dealing with as many injuries as the Dallas Cowboys are, but they are dealing with a lot of different pieces, just like the Dallas Cowboys are, in large part because Chip Kelly decided that he wanted to move some of these pieces. Now, I am a big Chip Kelly fan. I am a big fan of innovation and trying new things, so I'm 100% behind him on that. He thinks he knows what's wrong with the Eagles, at least this is according to what he said to the media the other day, and I am not behind this. So let me just read this quote. It's up on the screen if you want to flip to the YouTube, but there's no need to here. Chip Kelly said, "You got to stay on the field on third down. So if third down gets you a first down, now we can run the football. We're not converting third downs, and that's the biggest problem with us offensively right now. We need to play more on offense. That's the bottom line. We're getting off the field on third down, and most of the time when we're getting off the field on third down, it's our fault. We're not getting stopped. We're doing it to ourselves." Now, many problems that I have with this, but let's handle just a couple of them. First and foremost, you're not doing it to yourselves. The defense is doing it to you. The defense sees your weakened offensive line. It's not run blocking very well. It's not pass protecting extremely well. They see your quarterback who's running around on little stilt-looking legs like a frightened deer, and they're attacking him. They're forcing him to throw the ball poorly. He's making poor decisions when he's throwing it. He's not being accurate, and your offense doesn't have any good deep threats down the field. And so that's the problem in terms of why you're failing. But it's because you're doing it to yourself just as much as it is the opponents are doing it to you. So this nonsense about the other teams don't matter, we're doing it to ourselves, that's complete BS, Chip Kelly. But the biggest problem I have with this is you're not looking at the right issue. It's obvious that your team stinks on third down. That's an obvious statement. Any idiot coach would say that. Yeah, we stink on third down. The problem is not that you stink on third down. Think about the reason why you stink on third down. The reason why you stink on third down is because you're averaging 8.3 yards to go on third down. At 8.3 yards to go on third down is the third worst in the NFL, behind the Chiefs and the Bucs. Now, if you look at the Chiefs and the Bucs, guess what? They also stink on third down. Worst teams in the league along with you, the Philadelphia Eagles. The reason you guys all stink on third down is not just because you happen to stink on third down and you got to be better on third down. It's because you've got so many yards to go because you stink on first and second down. That's the reason that you're faced with so many third and longs. That's the reason you can't convert them. Why are you faced with so many third and longs? It's because you can't run the football. Chip Kelly made the statement, if third down gets you a first down, now we can run the football. Guess what? Now you can run the football terribly because on first downs this year, your team is averaging 2.9 yards per carry on first down runs. That's miserable. Now, DeMarco Murray himself is averaging 1.5 yards per carry. That's terrible. Ryan Matthews, perhaps a better fit for the offense, is averaging 5.3 yards per carry when he runs the ball on first downs. So maybe sprinkling him in a little bit more frequently would be of use. Now, the team goes to second down. On second down, they average worse, 2.7 yards per carry. You can't get much worse than 2.9 average, but you can at 2.7 on second down is what the Eagles are doing. DeMarco Murray also, you can't get much worse than 1.5 yards per carry on first down, except he does, and he goes down to 0.9 yards per carry on second down runs. So what is that going to do to your quarterback and to your offense in general when you're running for 2.9 and 2.7 yards per carry? You're going to be faced with a ton of third and longs. And obviously they are because they're averaging 8.3 yards to go on third down, third worst in the NFL. So on third and 8+ yards, Sam Bradford this year is 12 of 21 for 5.8 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 sack for negative 14 yards. That's a 53.9 passer rating. That's terrible. Okay? Now, we realize he's having struggles, but first of all, you need 8.3 yards to go. It's a third and 8+, and you're averaging 5.8 yards per attempt. That tells you everything you need to know. Bradford is checking down everything. He's looking for the short routes. The deeper routes that he attempts, number one, most of them haven't been that deep. They finally hit a few nice deep balls against the Washington Redskins, but a lot of his passes are not the very deep variety. They need to work on getting him to shoot the ball down the field a little bit more. But he's overthrowing or underthrowing or just missing a lot of these mid-range routes, and instead most of his yards are coming closer to the line of scrimmage. And that's why when you look at just his passes on third and 8+ to wide receivers, he's 5 of 13 for 4.1 yards per attempt and a 19 passer rating. A 19 passer rating when passing to wide receivers on third and 8+ yards to go. That's not going to get it done. And it all gets back to the real problem is not that you stink on third downs, Chip Kelly. It's that you stink on first and second down runs. And that's what needs to be fixed is the run game on first and second downs. If you fix that, then you're going to, number one, set yourself up for third and short, which your offense will be able to convert at a much better rate inherently. Number two, you open up the game for play action with a good run game on early downs. Then you can play action things throughout the course of the game and help Sam Bradford out a ton because your play action game is awesome up in Philly, but you're not using it hardly at all because you can't run the football. So that's the problem, and hopefully they will work on fixing that rather than simply saying we need to get better on third downs. Story number 3, leading early matters even still. Last week we broke the story. This is based on my own research that the 4 years from 2011 to 2014, teams with a lead after the first quarter won on average 64% of their games. This is why I was talking about the importance for Joe Philbin's Miami Dolphins to get off to a big lead. We included some of those slides. I was talking about that all last summer as well. I talked about it in my NFL preview magazine, talked about it and updated it this year, and sure enough, they canned him just today. Well, now we're looking at how things are going in 2015, and guess what? It's going crazy, as we discussed in the podcast last week. It was up to 85% of games were won by teams who were leading after the first quarter. Now, it went 13-0 last week. So it's up to 47 wins and only 6 losses if you've had a lead after the first quarter. That's 89% wins after the first quarter. If you have the lead at the end of the first quarter, you're winning 89% of games in 2015. Now, let's be perfectly clear. I do not expect this number to remain at 89%. I thought we'd have a losing week or something last week and it would have dropped. Certainly did not expect going 13-0 for those teams again last week. I do think it's going to drop off and regress a little bit more towards the mean. But I will say this. It really goes to show you how bad some of these teams are from a coaching perspective. Number one, it's about preparation and figuring out your game plan to defeat an opponent. This season, we don't even really have so many dominant teams. If you look around the league at what we had last season, you look at the Cowboys and the Eagles and a lot of these teams that were really dominant teams last year, whether it's the Ravens or the Steelers or there's so many teams last season that were really good and dominant. The Patriots obviously were later in the season. The Seattle Seahawks were. But now you're looking at these teams. Nobody besides the Patriots, how the Arizona Cardinals flashed for a little bit, but they just lost to the St. Louis Rams. The Packers seem to be one of those teams that is going to be a team that can dominate, but there just aren't that many teams where there's clear cut, this is a blowout game, we just know it. And so there is no coming back if you're down at the end of the first quarter. Most of these teams should be able to mount comebacks over these opponents. There's no teams out there that really are foolproof and can't be beaten, except for the couple that I've mentioned that are just really clicking quite nicely right now. On certain weeks, those teams are going to lose too. But for the most part, every single week, if you're down at the end of the first quarter, you should be able to come back. So to me, it's the fact that these coaches don't have a good game plan entering the game, and they don't have a good backup plan to switch to if their game plan isn't working out the right way that they want it to, and they just are screwed. And it's really pathetic how these teams cannot figure out the best way to make halftime or in-game adjustments, to figure something out, to play more efficiently and effectively, to attack their opponent's weaknesses a little bit better. They're just not very intelligent with game planning, with managing their games, and it's sad, but that's the way that it is. Apparently right now, 89% of the time, if you lead after the first quarter, you're going to be able to hang on to that game, and maybe that'll regress, but it's a very interesting thing to note right now. That number should be dropping back down soon, but the point remains, regardless of what that number is, I really am down on the coaching in the NFL. The play calling, the decision making in general for most of these guys just really doesn't cut it for these professional teams. So now let's just go ahead and jump right into some of these games that we saw last week. I was going to talk a little bit about the kicking, but I'm not going to go into any detail there. All I can tell you is this. If we're discussing kicking and players kicking too bad or too poorly and costing teams games right now in September and October, I shudder to think of what we're going to be talking about in November, December, and guess what? The football season, Week 17, is into January this year when these extra points are a lot longer and these teams are going to need to rely on their kickers more. It's going to be a disaster. So that's something we don't have to look forward to later, but let's start talking about some of these Week 4 games. All right, let's start with the Thursday night game, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens. This was a game that was basically a tactical nightmare for Todd Haley. He called some absolutely garbage fourth down play calls for the Pittsburgh Steelers in this game. The first one came near the end of regulation. They just needed a first down. The game would have been over. They would have won. The Ravens would have dropped to 0-4. Todd Haley calls Mike Vick, a quarterback who obviously hasn't started this season yet, and hasn't played much at all since he was released from the Jets, to do a rollout to the left and try to gain the first down on a designed run by him. The Baltimore Ravens sniffed that out immediately. There's no chance that was going to have any success, and they obviously stopped him there. Were able to send the game into overtime. In overtime, the Pittsburgh Steelers had the opportunity once again to go for it on fourth down, and this time they decided to send Mike Vick, a left-handed passer, to roll out to the right to try to throw a pass to Antonio Brown, who is running parallel to Mike Vick, running out to Mike Vick's right as well. Obviously, a left-handed passer is going to have a much easier time throwing the ball if he's moving to his left and the receiver's moving to his left as well. This play clearly seemed like it was designed for Ben Roethlisberger in the playbook, who's a right-handed passer, and the play obviously did not succeed. Baltimore Ravens got the ball, drove it down the field. Justin Tucker kicked a field goal. Now, speaking of Justin Tucker with this field goal, I mentioned this past summer as soon as I saw that the Pittsburgh Steelers starting kicker was injured and out for the year. This was going to be a problem for the Steelers, particularly when they're trying to win this division and go up against the Baltimore Ravens. These games, the Steelers and the Ravens, are always close. They're always competitive. They seem to start off different ways, but they always seem to end the same way, and that is a close 3-point game or something decided by one score. When you're the Pittsburgh Steelers and you're missing multiple field goals, and that therefore forces you to call plays on fourth downs and attempt fourth downs to try to move the ball closer because you're not confident in your kicker's range whatsoever, that impacts the game multiple ways. The Steelers missed 2 field goals in this game and then had to start calling these fourth down plays with really unintelligent decision making by Todd Haley. That was the difference in this game. But from a production standpoint, offensively, the Pittsburgh Steelers, very good completion percentage for Mike Vick, but nothing was deep downfield, 3.7 yards per attempt, but he completed 73% of his passes. So they at least were able to keep the sticks moving in terms of not having negative plays, not throwing incompletions, not throwing interceptions. They leaned on the run game, 33 carries, 167 yards is 5.1 yards per attempt. That was better than what Baltimore pulled off, but Baltimore had a great day on the ground as well, 4.9 yards per carry. Hopefully for them, Forsett is going to be back and he's going to be starting to play better behind this offensive line because he did not play very well at all the first 3 weeks of the season. Overall, because of the struggles of the quarterbacks, Joe Flacco's, his numbers were very bad as well, only a 71 passer rating. Mike Vick was up at 91. Both quarterbacks were sacked a bunch, so the yards per play overall for each of these teams was very poor. But the run games is what kept them afloat, and Joe Flacco obviously had that one clutch drive down the field to try to move his team into field goal range, so Justin Tucker kicked the game-winning field goal in overtime. Very, very entertaining, competitive game, but just fraught with terrible decision-making from the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Moving to another game that was somewhat embarrassing was the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. This was the Joe Philbin game, got him fired. Once again, as I mentioned before, I mentioned this in my NFL Preview magazine that was released this past summer. The Miami Dolphins struggle in the first quarter. They always get behind. They always trail. That's what happened here. Once again, down by 10 points at the end of the first quarter. Just a pathetic effort from them out in London, and they got off to that bad start, and it just snowballed. They were down by 20 points by the end of the third quarter. Now, that although they were down by a fair amount, they've realized, I guess, that we can't continue to run the ball. But on the ground, they were gaining 5.4 yards per carry. That was 5th best in the NFL. They kept having Ryan Tannehill throw it, though, and he was only gaining 3.8 yards per attempt. So they were gaining almost 2 more yards per play running the football, but they had Ryan Tannehill throw it 44 times. They only ran it 11 times. So that was obviously a bad move on their part to try to go so pass heavy, but I guess they were losing, so they figured, what the hell, let's just throw it all the time. Just a bad showing. 0 for 12 on third downs. Terrible. The Jets, very efficient offensively. Good performance. Not the best from the quarterback. He's had a 77 passer rating. Decent day on the ground, 4.8 yards per carry. 5.9 yards per play for the Jets. That was 11th best. Miami Dolphins, worst of the week. 3.9 yards per play. Moving to a game that, again, another kicker game that cost this team the victory, and that was the Indianapolis Colts versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars had every opportunity to win this game. They obviously had to go to overtime. Their field goal kicker missed a kick. They had another shot at the same distance. He missed that one again, wide right, both occasions. Then he had a shot in overtime, missed that one. It's just a devastating loss for the Jaguars because obviously the Colts are the class of that division. Definitely a team that a young Jacksonville Jaguars should be hungry to beat. They basically did everything that they needed to win except for make those kicks. Because when you look at what the Indianapolis Colts did offensively, they only ran for 2.5 yards per rush, second worst in the league. The Jacksonville Jaguars ran for 5.1 yards per carry, 142 total yards. Their quarterback completed 5.8 yards per pass, which is not good, but it was actually better than what Andrew Luck did. So the numbers overall from a yards per play perspective, Jaguars were better than the Colts. The Jaguars, neither team was that great on third down conversion. The Jaguars at 39%, Colts at 47%. But both teams terrible inside the red zone when they got there. Combined 2 of 7 in this game inside the red zone. That kept the score way down, 13-16 final score for the Indianapolis Colts. The Bills and the Giants was a game that the Giants won pretty handily. They won by 14 points. They were up by 13 at the half and after the third quarter. But if you look at the Giants offense and you say, how did they get this lead? What did they do to maintain this lead? You don't really see much there. From a statistical perspective, they only completed 57% of their passes. Eli Manning had 1 interception, 6 yards per pass attempt. That wasn't very good. 3.3 yards per rush. That was 24th in the league this past week. 8 punts in the game, 11 penalties. And so you say, how would that get them the win? But the reality is, it was their defense was what was getting the job done for them. They held the Buffalo Bills to the second worst early down success rate in the league this past week. The Bills had only 14 first downs, but went to third down 16 times. They only got to the Giants' red zone 3 times, did not convert a single time there. They only went 1 of 2 on their field goal attempts. And they held the Buffalo Bills run game to only 2.3 yards per rush. This New York Giants defense has been very good defending the run, surprisingly, this year. Their secondary was what was having problems. You kind of thought that Tyrod Taylor might have some space to use his wheels to run around a little bit in this game, but no such luck whatsoever. The New York Giants completely shut down the ground game for the Buffalo Bills in a very impressive manner. The Buffalo Bills were undone by turnovers, which they had 2, and penalties, which they had 17. Neither of those obviously is a good thing. Neither of those is going to help you get the victory. Same thing for lack of success inside the red zone, which was interesting because the Bills so far this year, the prior 3 weeks, did not get down to the red zone as much as other teams, but when they were there, they had the second best red zone conversion rate, but in this game, 0 for 3 in the red zone. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Carolina Panthers, this is a fun game to discuss because there was a lot of wise guy money, wise guy action on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in this game. I personally did not have a dog in the fight, nor did I have anything on the total. But the final score, the Carolina Panthers won by 14 points. Well, the Carolina Panthers had 2 non-offensive touchdowns on returns, interceptions. So that right there was the difference in the final margin, just those 2 turnovers for returns for touchdowns. But look at the rest of the statistics. From the turnover perspective, which is generally what wins and loses games, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers threw 4 interceptions in this game, 5 total turnovers. You're not going to be able to win games like that. But even so, with those 4 interceptions, 5 total turnovers, statistically, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense held Cam Newton to only 50% completions, 11 of 22. 5 yards per pass attempt, that was 24th in the league. On the ground, they gained only 4 yards per carry, that was 20th in the league. So on a yards per play basis, they only gained 4.3 yards per play in this game, that was 24th in the league. Meanwhile, on the flip side, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had more first downs. They had 7 more first downs in this game. They were better from an early down success rate perspective. They had 25 first downs and only went to third down 16 times. They were better from a third down perspective, way better. 50% conversions on third down against this good Carolina Panthers defense. Carolina only converted 27% against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They got down to the red zone 5 times. Actually, both teams got down there 5 times, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers converted 3 of them into touchdowns. The Carolina Panthers only converted 2 of them into touchdowns. Now, from a passing perspective, Jameis Winston, 60% completions. Not great, but still better than Cam Newton. 6.3 yards per attempt. That was about average this week, and better than Cam Newton. His passer rating obviously was lower because of all those interceptions. On the ground, they ran for 4.7 yards per carry, 141 rushing yards compared to 133 for Carolina. So Carolina Panthers continue to win games in a variety of different ways, but call me still somewhat of a skeptic in terms of wanting to crown this team as a vastly superior team. They've gone up against very subpar opposing quarterbacks. They've gotten a lot done with defense. That defense is about to get an upgrade with Hardy coming back. This is still a good team. It's just the fact that the way that they've been winning these games, I mean, in this case, if you take away those 2 defensive touchdowns, even if you give all those interceptions for the Carolina Panthers, Tampa Bay's probably hanging close to this game, not losing it by 14 points. But you just cannot win games with 4 interceptions. Jameis Winston's got to get a lot better, but Cam Newton does as well with his performance out there. The Eagles and the Redskins, this was a game where I did have multiple things in this game. I was on the Redskins and I was on the under. A lot of people, you really have to be careful about where you're getting your information from. I'm obviously based right now outside the D.C. area, though I go to Vegas from time to time. I am residing outside of D.C. right now. This hurricane, for maybe about a day, was potentially projected to come up the Potomac and hit D.C. The rest of the time, after that, maybe 24, 36 hours, it was always being projected to go out to the Gulf, go up the East Coast, not come into D.C. Yet everybody was talking about the weather and all these problems that was going to be happening in D.C. for this game. And that's why, in part, the total was dropping down. Now, I like the under regardless of any of that. I thought the matchup with these 2 defenses was going to dictate this game was going to go under that 47-point total, and it did. But there's just so many people out there very scared of this weather situation, which really was mainly affecting a lot of teams in college, particularly those in the South Carolina and Georgia area, as opposed to, Sunday afternoon up in the D.C. area. But just be careful where you get your information from. Do a lot of research on your own. That'll help save you some worries down the road. But in this particular game, total domination from the Washington Redskins, much more so even than was on the scoreboard. The difference here, though, the Eagles kept it close and actually had a lead late thanks to a lot of big plays that they finally were able to connect on, beating the Redskins, beat up secondary down the field. But overall, the Redskins won this game by controlling time of possession. They had the ball for over 41 minutes. The Philadelphia Eagles only had it for less than 19 minutes. That was the largest time differential of anybody this entire weekend. The Redskins got that done thanks in large part to converting 53% of their third downs. They ended up having 25 first downs. That was 3rd best in the NFL this past week. They had 5 sacks on the Philadelphia Eagles, and they were able to run the ball for 4 yards per carry. Now, that wasn't great, and the Eagles actually ran it better at 4.8 yards per carry, but the difference was the Redskins were sticking with the ground game, whereas the Philadelphia Eagles only ran it 18 times. The Redskins ran it 32 times. The Philadelphia Eagles completed only 54% of their passes from Bradford, but they had a big 8.3 yards per attempt. So even with all those incompletions, he hit a lot of deep passes on this Redskins defense that really gave the Philadelphia Eagles a lot of life when they needed it. Now, Chip Kelly, as I mentioned before, complained a lot about the third downs, and I already went into why that's not really the deciding factor. It's their inefficiency on the early downs that's causing them to go into third and so long. But obviously in this particular game, they only completed 33% of their third down. So they're struggling there, but it's not because they're not good on third down. It's because they're having to attempt such long third downs, and no team is going to be good in those situations. The Oakland Raiders at the Chicago Bears was a game that got off to a very quick start by both teams. Pretty close at the half, only a 2-point lead for the Chicago Bears. And then slowed down in the second half, a bunch of field goal attempts as well as an interception thrown by Jay Cutler in the red zone. This was a game that on the Thursday edition of this podcast that we released on Friday, Evan Silva and I broke down the fact that we thought the Bears would be competitive. I certainly thought that they would be able to have a really good shot in this game. And the main surprise to me, obviously they did have a good shot, they ended up winning this game, but the main surprise to me was the fact that both teams could not really run the ball very effectively whatsoever. I thought Forte would have a good game on the ground. I also thought Latavius Murray for the Raiders would have a good day on the ground, but only 3.4 yards per carry for the Bears, only 3.2 yards per carry for the Raiders. Passing-wise, both quarterbacks were about the mid to low 60% range in terms of completion percentage, and not a whole lot else of interest to discuss in this game. The Bears were very good on third down conversions. Both teams were pretty good on third down conversions. Bears were second best. The Raiders were eighth best. That's why there were so few punts. Obviously, this game could have probably gone over the total considering how efficient these offenses were. They made multiple trips down to the red zone, each of them. The Bears went 2 of 3. Raiders went 1 of 2. 5 total field goals were attempted and made in this game, so it ended up coming down to a bunch of failed third down conversions. But overall, that was the big surprise to me, was the lack of ability to run the football in this game. Falcons and Texans was a complete massacre. The Falcons were up 28-0 at halftime, piled on another 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So their biggest lead in this game was 42 points. Texans obviously never won, never led in this game whatsoever. And the Falcons 4-4 in the red zone against the Houston Texans. Matt Ryan, 70% completions, 9 yards per attempt. That was third best in the league. They ran for 135 yards. They ended up running a lot more late, and so their yards per carry number is depressed a little bit here at 3.9 yards per carry, but a really good day on the ground for Freeman. This offense is just clicking on all cylinders right now. You really can't say enough about what Kyle Shanahan has brought to this offense, playing very well, and obviously defensively Dan Quinn is playing well too. This team looks like it's headed for a crash course with the Carolina Panthers for the winner of this division. That should be a very competitive season as that plays out, the battle between both those two teams. But right now, the Atlanta Falcons, that is a team that we took some futures on to win the division, and they're looking like a really strong contender right now at 4-0. The Cincinnati Bengals hosted the Kansas City Chiefs, and this was the game where I was all over the over. This was a game I really liked the over, but my main concern was how will the Chiefs do on third down. They've obviously struggled tremendously on third down. They actually completed 44% of their third downs. That was 10th best, but the Bengals outdid them. They completed 60% of their third down conversions against this Kansas City defense. That was the best conversion rate in the NFL. The main difference here for the Chiefs in terms of why they couldn't get anything done is the field goals. They went 0 for 3 in the red zone. Meanwhile, the Cincinnati Bengals went 4 for 4 in the red zone. The Kansas City Chiefs had to settle for 7 field goals. The Bengals didn't even score a single field goal. They attempted one, but they missed it. So the Bengals got all their scores from touchdowns. They had 5 touchdowns. The Chiefs had 0 touchdowns, but they had 7 field goals. So just a very crazy game here from that perspective. Both teams very efficient. Both quarterbacks played great. 71% completions for Andy Dalton, 13.4 yards per attempt, and 127 passer rating. This was a game on that Friday morning podcast that I mentioned how good Andy Dalton was at throwing this deep ball against the Chiefs. I thought he was going to have a lot of success. It was obviously one of the reasons I like this game to go over, but more importantly, I thought it was going to open up some things in the ground game, and Evan Silva and I talked about that at length, and sure enough, the Bengals got their run game jumped off, started on the ground very effectively, 4.8 yards per carry, multiple touchdowns on the ground for them, so great day from the run game. The Chiefs, 4.9 yards per carry, good day from Jamal Charles as well, 7.7 yards per attempt. That was a big difference here. That's still 8th best in the league in terms of what Alex Smith was able to do through the air, but when Andy Dalton is completing 13.4 yards per attempt, it's pretty difficult to keep up with that without some more big plays from the pass game and obviously the lack of ability to get in the red zone and actually put a touchdown on the board. Chargers and the Browns, this was definitely a game where I was on the Browns. All the wise guys were on the Browns as well. Dropped this line from 7.5 on Saturday evening all the way down to 5s during the day on Sunday morning. Let's face it, the Cleveland Browns, you don't think much of this team, But in this particular game, they came to play, and I was shocked myself at how efficient they got production from the quarterback position. McCown was 32 of 41, that's 78% completions. That was second best in the NFL this past week. 8.1 yards per pass attempt, that was seventh best, a 117 passer rating. That was actually tied with Philip Rivers' passer rating in this game. And overall, because they were able to run the ball for 4.8 yards per carry, which was better than what the Chargers were able to do, the Browns gained 6.6 yards per play. Now, the Chargers gained 7.2 yards per play. Those were actually the number 2 and number 3 best yards per plays of the week, and that's what resulted in 57 points on the scoreboard at the end of the day in this game, because Philip Rivers was able to pass the ball for 9.1 yards per attempt and that 117 rating I just mentioned a second ago. The Chargers were very good from an early down success rate perspective. They gained 23 first downs but only went to third down 11 times. They were 27%, so not very good when they did get to third down, but fortunately for them, they skipped it often. Interesting aspect of this game was time of possession. The Browns completely controlled the time of possession in this game, almost 35 minutes to 25 minutes for the Chargers. But all in all, a very close game throughout. The biggest lead for the Chargers was 8 points. The biggest lead for the Browns was 3 points. Back and forth game that ended up being tied at halftime, and the Chargers obviously won by a field goal late. 49ers and the Packers. This was a game we broke down in great detail with Evan Silva on the weekend edition of this podcast last week, where we discussed the key for the 49ers was to come out very balanced with some bigger chunk plays in the pass game to open up some things in the run game, to let Colin Kaepernick go wild on the ground, be very unpredictable, but most of all, try to keep Aaron Rodgers off the field. Don't let him get rolling. Use your time of possession to your advantage. Well, as it turned out here, because of lack of production on the early downs, as well as poor third down conversions, the Green Bay Packers were able to control the ball for almost 37 minutes in this game, and the 49ers only had it for 23 minutes. And the story of this one was basically Colin Kaepernick's overall inefficiency. Though he only had one interception and could have obviously thrown many more, he went 13 to 25 for only 52% completions. That was 25th in the league. A 4.8 yards per pass attempt, that was 26th, and a 49 passer rating, which was 28th, which was the worst that we had seen up through the Monday night game. And that was because of the fact that he threw no touchdowns and that one interception that made those numbers worse than what they looked. Overall, the 49ers only 3.9 yards per play. That was second worst in the league this past weekend. Now, the Green Bay Packers didn't really do anything spectacular to run away with this game. They just played very efficiently, and they maintained their lead. They led by 14 at the end of the third quarter. They were only up by 4 at halftime, but they maintained that 14-point lead and ended up winning by 14, hold the 49ers to only 3 points. 49ers got into the Green Bay red zone only 2 times, did not convert a single time. The Packers got into the 49ers red zone 4 times, converted twice. Aaron Rodgers, 69% completions, only 6.3 yards per pass attempt. He really doesn't have that deep threat right now on the team, and he made stuff work underneath very efficiently, but none of the big plays that we were accustomed to see out of Aaron Rodgers from the deep passing game, only 200 yards passing in this game. But they were able to turn to their run, and they ran all over this 49ers defense. 4.9 yards per carry, 162 total rushing yards, 33 rushing attempts, a very balanced number. Just controlled the clock from that perspective and kept the 49ers offense struggling, never able to get into a good rhythm on the sidelines. The Rams and the Cardinals was a game that was an interesting one because of how efficient the Cardinals offense was, but how good the Rams looked on the ground running the football. When you look at the Rams, the key for them in this game was what they did on the ground. They only went 16 to 24 passing the football, but they ran it 26 times for 164 yards at 6.3 yards per rush attempt. Several really long runs, breakaways by Todd Gurley. 6.4 yards per play, largely due to the fact that they were able to run the ball so effectively. That was 5th best in the league this past week. And 126 passer rating from the quarterback. Now, the main reason why he was able to be so effective from that perspective, even though he only hit 67% of his completions, is no interceptions and 3 touchdown passes. So Nick Foles, a very good day from the pocket, throwing the ball without turning it over, and that's key to getting wins on the road, particularly as a difficult a place to do that as Arizona. But the interesting thing about this game was the Cardinals only punted the ball one time. St. Louis punted it 7 times. So the Cardinals had the ball for most of the time. They were very efficient offensively. They had twice as many first downs as did the Rams. 26 first downs to only 13 for the Rams. Significantly better early down success rate. If you look at what the Rams did, they had 13 first downs. They went to third down 13 times. Very poor efficiency from them from that perspective. But they were able to get into the red zone 5 times, which is just what the Arizona Cardinals did as well. However, the Rams scored 3 touchdowns. The Cardinals only scored 1 touchdown. And this game sort of was a little bit similar from that perspective as the Bengals-Chiefs game. The Rams were scoring touchdowns. They only kicked 1 field goal. The Cardinals were not scoring touchdowns. They kicked 5 field goals, but it wasn't enough. They needed at least 1 more touchdown. They ended up losing the game by 2 points, a game that they basically trailed through the majority of this game. They never had the lead in this game. At one point, the Rams were up by 9, but it was pretty much within 5 points for most of this game. After every single quarter, the Rams were up by 4, by 1, by 5, and they ended up winning it by 2 at the very end of the games. The Vikings and the Broncos was a game I predicted to be lower scoring, and it was to an extent. Both of these teams, the rushing numbers in this game are going to look a little bit skewed. So when you're looking back at how well these teams can run the football or how good their run defenses are, you have to factor in that Adrian Peterson on a 4th and 1, the Broncos were stacking the box pretty much almost in a goal line type defense. And Adrian Peterson just broke through the middle and raced probably 50 yards for a touchdown on that one singular run. And then Ronnie Hillman broke a massive run for the Denver Broncos, well over 70 yards on one particular carry. So for the rest of the game, these teams were really unable to run the ball very effectively whatsoever. I projected that Teddy Bridgewater was not going to be able to have success in the pocket, and sure enough, only 5.2 yards per pass attempts for Teddy Bridgewater. That was 23rd in the NFL, and he was harassed constantly. The Broncos sacked him 7 times, but he did make some very spectacular plays from time to time, scrambling and connecting with receivers down the field. So in the face of a lot of pressure, he still did okay from that perspective. Now, on the Broncos side of things, they were a very efficient offense. They only went to third down 9 times, but they only converted 22% of their third downs. That was 23rd. They did hold the Vikings to only 38%. So neither team in this game converted even 20 first downs. A very defensive-oriented battle. A game that was pretty close throughout. The Broncos obviously had a 13-point lead, but it was only 3 points at the end of the first quarter, 3 points at halftime, and they won the game by 3 points at the very end, with the Vikings coming back, drawing the game a lot closer towards the end of it. The Saints and the Cowboys, this was a game that the Saints obviously looked very good in this game against this Cowboys defense, who lost Sean Lee early in the game to a concussion. Drew Brees, even though he couldn't really throw the ball very far downfield, 80% completions on 41 attempts and 8.2 yards per attempt. They still were able to run the ball pretty effectively, 25 carries at 4.1 yards per carry. You would have thought that they would have tried to run the ball a little bit more, gaining 4.1 yards per carry given Drew Brees' shoulder, but for whatever reason, they still were passing the ball, 41 pass attempts. Now, the Cowboys, they tried their old strategy of, we're going to just run the ball. We're not going to try to let the quarterback get involved too much because we don't have as much confidence in Brandon Weeden. And so they ran the ball 28 times, only threw the ball 26 times. A very close game throughout. Again, in this one, the Cowboys at one point did have a 3-point lead. The Saints, though, had an 8-point lead at one point in this game. And obviously it went to overtime, tied at the end of the fourth quarter, tied at the end of the third quarter, too. Very, very competitive game throughout. But I think one of the main issues for this game, both the teams were somewhat inefficient when they got into the red zone, and the Cowboys were just very bad on third downs. Now, I mentioned earlier about the running, about how the Cowboys are not being able to run the ball very effectively later in the game. That's a big problem. It cost them in this game, and it's cost them throughout the course of the season. They've been able to still win a couple games, but the last 2 games they've lost, they were up at the half and just could not hold on in the second half. They were leading at the half. Here they were up by 3. They could just not hold on, allowing the Saints and Drew Brees to come back in this game. And last but not least, the Monday night game, Detroit at Seattle. This game was ridiculous on so many levels. I'll go. This will be a little bit longer because I'm going to go on a couple of rants here. The first rant is against the Detroit Lions and their game plan heading into this one. It made absolutely zero sense what they were attempting to do. There are certain games when you can try to establish the run, and even if you're gaining a couple yards of play, but it's enabling you to hit some big plays down the field, then that's okay. There's other games where you're establishing the run and you are gaining like 3.5 yards per carry. It's not what you would like, but it's at least setting you up in 3rd and short. In this particular game, they seemed intent on establishing the run. They only gained 2.9 yards per rush, but they weren't even attempting to try to hit anything deep down the field until much, much later into the game. So as a result, they were punting quite frequently in the first half. In the game, they only went 3 of 13 on 3rd downs. Part of the reason, obviously, Seattle's defense is very good, so that's not a surprise that you're not going to have a good 3rd down conversion rate on Monday night against Seattle. So what the plan needs to be is to avoid 3rd downs by being efficient enough on 1st and 2nd downs, and they simply did not have any desire to do that. They were trying to continuously set themselves up to convert on 3rd downs, and it's just the most ridiculous game plan. I researched statistics that during the course of this game, Seattle's defense has allowed just 29 touchdown drives where a team gained 4 or more first downs on that drive, marching the ball up the field since 2011. That's the second fewest in the NFL. You cannot march the ball up and down this field on this team consistently. Yes, some teams with great offenses are able to do that. That's not what the Lions offense has right now. You need to splash in chunk plays. You need to splash in those big explosive plays along the way, deep passes. That's how you're going to do it. And also another statistic I researched during this game. No team has won in Seattle since 2011 without at least 3 deep passes for first down. Now by deep, I only mean 15 plus yards in the air. So it's a pass traveling at least 15 yards in the air, and then of course whatever yak they get yards after the catch, that goes on top of that. But most of the teams, all the teams who are winning games in Seattle are doing that. The teams that aren't winning games are the teams that are trying to do exactly what the Detroit Lions did, which is slowly matriculate the ball down the field and hope that they can do that with some level of consistency. It's just not going to happen. The second rant is about the referees and the way that this game ended. If you didn't catch the end of it because it was pretty late out on the East Coast where I am as well, but I always obviously watch all these things and stay up. I don't sleep much during the season, but at any rate, this game was a 10-point game. Seattle was up 13-3. Russell Wilson fumbles the football. Detroit Lions return that fumble for a touchdown, cut the score to 13-10. Fast forward to the very end of the game. That happened with 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Fast forward to the very end of the game, just under 2 minutes left. Detroit has the football in the red zone, about to try to punch the football in. They throw the ball to Calvin Johnson. He runs into basically the mouth of the end zone. He's like right next to it. Cam Chancellor, awesome play, comes in, knocks the ball loose. The ball bounds into the end zone, and a Seattle Seahawks defender knocks the ball out of the end zone. Back judge is standing right there, bent over, watching exactly what happens as he knocks the ball out of the end zone and does nothing. Now, the broadcast continues as if it was a great defensive play and nothing should be done about it. But then we start to hear later, after the game has already been started, and obviously Seattle at that point just had to get one more first down, and they were able to do that and ice the game, seal the game. But the bottom line was, starts to get the word that was an illegal bat out of the end zone. Now, there's all types of discussion as to whether or not it was overt or intentional. And as we find out now, at least according to what I've seen, the most recent rule, recent discussion, it doesn't matter whether it was overt, intentional or not. You are not allowed to bat the ball out of the end zone. It's a flag. It should have been the Lions' ball, first and goal at the 1 yard line. Now, looking back, I looked back at the last 15 years when teams were down by exactly 3 points with anywhere from just under 2 minutes left in the game till the end of the game, and they have first and goal at the opponent's 1, 80% of the time those teams won those games. Only 20% of the time did they lose. Most of the time they're scoring, whether it was a touchdown or field goals. Only one time in the sample did a team fumble the ball and lose that game. Most of the time they're kicking field goals and sending it into overtime. Some of those games they win, some they lose, but 80% of the time they are scoring touchdowns and winning those games. So the bottom line here is the referees should have been given the Lions an 80% chance to win this game, first and goal on Seattle's 1-yard line. Instead, they gave the ball to Seattle on the 20, and that was that. It's utterly incompetent that the referees do not understand the rules, number one. They're being paid to do this. Supposedly, the NFL is the best league, obviously, in the world. We should be having the best referees in the world who understand the game of American football the best. And the fact that we have officials and referees who do not understand all the rules is a joke. I don't care how complex the rule book is. That is their only job. Okay, I don't care how difficult or how obscure some of these rules were, which, by the way, batting the ball out of the end zone, that should not be a very difficult rule. That's pretty black and white in terms of what should be called there. These aren't like random rules that randomly happen. This is batting of the football out of the end zone. That's a pretty standard thing. It happens from time to time. All referees should understand what that rule is. Now, here's the problem I have. At the end of the game, this is a key situation, a key time in the game. These referees should be huddling up. These referees should be deciding, hey, did you see anybody knock it out of the end zone? I mean, the first thing I would be doing is coming in there to a circle of zebras, and I'd be saying, did anybody see him knock it out of the end zone? Did anybody see him bat it out of the end zone? Because as long as that didn't happen, then it's a touchback and it's Seattle's ball. But if anybody happened to see that happen, then it's got to be first and goal for Detroit at the 1-yard line. That's the first and only question that you ask when you come into a group of these referees, and clearly that did not appear to be the case. So while it supposedly isn't reviewable, they should have been able to get it right. The fact that they don't understand the rules and are completely incompetent is a joke. The other thing that's a joke is there's only a few people that actually get paid and should be able to understand the rules. The refs, the coaches, the players, and the announcers. But it seems like the announcers have no clue. They have even worse clue than most of the fans watching who aren't getting paid whatsoever. But those announcers, they're sitting there, there's two of them on the air. They don't know what the hell the rules are. Oftentimes, I mean, they always have mics in their ear. They can clearly get communications with the truck. Somebody there should be able to tell them what the rules are, prevent them from looking like complete idiots. But that doesn't even occur. So what they end up doing is talking like they know what they're talking about, but they clearly don't. They sound stupid. Then they decide, after I've made a fool out of myself, I'm going to bring in some sort of expert. The expert half the time is either a really old ex-referee who really doesn't really sound convincing whatsoever when he talks, or it's a guy like Mike Carey who is wrong half the time, at least. At a minimum, he's wrong half the time with his explanations or what he thinks is the right rule or outcome of some review. He's always wrong. And so it's just a complete, I don't even know the right word to describe it, but it's a mockery of the product that they're trying to sell to us. They've really got to educate the announcers about the rules. And I don't care if you're announcing games to the public, you should know what the rules are. Again, I don't care how obscure or strange that rule is. And if you don't want to pay these announcers to get educated and go to classes to understand what all the rules are and all the random situations that could occur, then at least have somebody who knows what's going on that can actually whisper into their ear very quickly and tell them what the right rule should be. Some sort of expert there who's spotting things and helping these guys out, because it's a joke and they sound like total morons every single time that there's any type of rule controversy. They think it's funny to sound stupid, but the reality is they are stupid about the rules, and nobody out here thinks it's funny. It's insulting how uninformed the referees are and these announcers. So that's a big rant. Let's get back to the injuries. All right, guys, that last segment ran a long time, so we're going to really just jump into these injuries quickly. We're going to only hit on the offensive players that'll help you with obviously betting and capping these games as well as daily fantasy, but you'll have to look up some defensive injuries, as well as don't forget a lot of players who were suspended for the first 4 weeks will be able to return this week. Moving to the quarterbacks, we know Andrew Luck, he missed last week's game. Matt Hasselbeck had to take over. We'll have to see whether or not he will be healthy enough to go on Thursday against the Houston Texans. Obviously Drew Brees missed a game, but he played last week, and Ben Roethlisberger is still out. Andre Ellington for the Arizona Cardinals says that he's sprinting, and his coach says he's sprinting and working, but David Johnson, Chris Johnson playing very well, so we're not sure when Andre Ellington will be back, not very soon anyways. Joique Bell, he's missing time. He was out for the game tonight on Monday night. Lance Dunbar, he's out for the season, tearing his ACL and MCL. LaShawn McCoy, he's got a new hamstring tear. It's supposedly going to take 3 to 4 weeks. It's a grade 2. Marshawn Lynch, he also missed the game tonight, and so we'll have to see what the status is. They say his hamstring, he had an MRI, and it revealed some findings, whatever that means. Tevin Coleman missed his second game. He's out. He's considered day-to-day due to a rib fracture. We'll see where he stands. Alshon Jeffrey, a wide receiver, he sat out week 4 due to a grade 2 hamstring strain, and we'll have to see what his status is. He was a limited participant in practice last week. Cecil Shorts dislocated his shoulder during the last play of Sunday's game, and so we'll know more about that soon. Devontae Adams, he obviously missed last week's game with an injury as well. Deshaun Jackson, he's got a hamstring strain as well. He hasn't even returned to practice yet, so we'll have to see what his status is going to be this week when they take on the Atlanta Falcons. Nate Washington suffered a hamstring injury during the Sunday's game. We're not sure how severe that is. Sammy Watkins, he missed the game with a calf strain. That takes a little while. Probably not going to see him for a couple more weeks. And Steve Smith Sr., he suffered a back injury. He's got a couple of microfractures of his lumbar vertebrae. It's not going to require surgery, but he's going to be in a lot of pain, and muscles are going to be spasming, and so we'll have to see when he's going to be back on the field. They are saying it's going to be in a few weeks, but he's going to try to get back out there as quick as he can, of course. And Victor Cruz, he's inactive. Last week, he's receiving some platelet-rich plasma injections into his injured muscle. He probably will be out for a little while, to be honest. And as far as tight ends, Julius Thomas, he's been practicing. He's week to week. He might return week 6. Austin Seferian-Jenkins, he missed week 4 for the Bucs with a shoulder injury. Probably need another few weeks before he's able to return to the lineup. So there's some key skill position guys, and next time we'll be able to get to all the linemen and defensive players as well. All right, there's the injuries. Now, as far as a couple announcements before I wrap this up, number 1, make sure you guys are subscribing to this podcast. This edition is the rearview mirror edition of the podcast, where we go back in the rearview mirror, go over some top stories, obviously all the games, and break everything down with some analytics and some reasons why these teams won or lost. The edition that comes out for the weekend, it comes out on Fridays. I sit down with Evan Silva every single week. We break down all these games that are about to occur, break down edges in terms of sports betting. We break down edges in terms of daily fantasy, which players you should play, which guys you might want to stray from. It's a great episode, a lot of information there as well. So highly encourage you subscribe to the podcast, as well as give it some ratings, give it some reviews on iTunes. If you guys like it, let us know. If you guys think we need to work on any improvements, let us know about that as well. Secondly, my NFL stuff as terms of sports betting, we're at the quarter-way mark. We've completed 4 weeks of the season. We've got the rest of it to go. So far, NFL 65% overall on the totals, which is what my specialty is, 75%. College football total, same story over there, hitting 71% over there. So things are doing really well from that perspective. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, go ahead and go to the sharpfootballanalysis.com website and enter the coupon code SHARP, and you'll be able to get a nice $100 discount on any of the packages. And with all those packages, you pay nothing now. You pay nothing until April of 2016. So you get all the information, all the write-ups, all the material that I give to clients throughout the course of the rest of the season. You don't pay anything until April. So it's a pretty good deal. Save $100 while you're at it. Until we record this weekend edition, hope you guys enjoy. Good luck breaking down these games, figuring out some of your ideas, and you can bounce them off of ours when we get back to you on Friday with the weekend edition of the podcast.
This is going to be a fun ride. This is going to be a fun ride. Everybody want clap. I'm going to play when I want to play. Do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody, one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.